Commander Jake Morrison sat in the dark control room, staring at the screens that showed nothing but empty space. The Global Defense Initiative had been watching the stars for 20 years, waiting for something to happen. Most days were quiet. Most days were boring. Today was different. The alarm started beeping at 3:47 in the morning. Jake jumped up from his chair and ran to the main computer. Red lights flashed across the control panel. Something was coming from deep space, something they had never seen before. "Get me Dr. Lisa Parker," Jake shouted to his team. "Wake her up if you have to." Dr. Parker arrived 15 minutes later, still wearing her pajamas under her lab coat. She was the best language expert on Earth, but she had never worked with alien languages before. Nobody had, because there had never been any aliens to talk to. "What do we have?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "A signal from the Vega system," Jake replied. "It's weak, but it's definitely not natural. Something is trying to talk to us." Lisa sat down at her computer and began working. The signal was broken and hard to understand. It came in pieces, with long gaps of silence between each part. She worked for 6 hours, trying to put the pieces together like a puzzle. Captain Ryanstone arrived at noon. He was the head of Earth's New Interstellar Response Division, a group that had been formed just in case something like this happened. He looked tired and worried. "Any progress?" he asked. "Some," Lisa said. "It's definitely a language, but it's unlike anything we've ever heard. The grammar is completely different from human languages. But I think I'm starting to understand parts of it." Jake poured himself another cup of coffee. He had been awake for 12 hours straight, but he couldn't leave now. This was the most important day in human history. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Lisa suddenly stood up. Her face was pale. "I've got it," she said. "Most of it, anyway. You need to hear this." She pressed a button, and the computer began to translate the alien message. A mechanical voice filled the room. "To any who can hear this message, we are the Veltar of the Galactic Federation. We are dying. Our worlds are burning, our people are being killed or taken as slaves. We have heard stories of your kind, the humans of Earth. Stories say you are great warriors. Stories say you protect the weak. We beg you to help us." The room was silent for a long moment. Jake felt his heart beating faster. "First contact with aliens, and they were asking for help in a war," the message continued. "Our enemy is called the Crexenary. They have conquered hundreds of worlds. They kill for pleasure and take prisoners as workers. We have fought them for 50 years, but we are losing. Our weapons are not strong enough. Our soldiers are not brave enough. We have 12 worlds. Now we have only one. In a few weeks we will all be dead or enslaved." Lisa's hands shook as she worked to translate more of the message. "There's more," she said. "The Crexenary do not know about your world yet. If you help us, we will share all our technology with you. We will teach you to travel between stars. We will give you everything we have. But if you cannot help us, please hide. Please keep your people safe. The Crexenary will find you someday, and when they do, they will destroy you too." Captain Stone sat down heavily in a chair. "How long ago was this sent?" "Based on the signal? Strength and distance about 3 weeks ago," Jake answered. "That means they might already be gone." The final part of the message was the hardest to hear. "We know we are asking much from strangers. We know you have no reason to fight for us. But we have children just like you. We have families who want to live in peace. We have done nothing wrong except be too weak to protect ourselves. If there is any mercy in your hearts, please help us. Please save us. This is our last hope." The message ended with coordinates, too. The Veltar home system and technical data about their technology. Lisa printed out everything and handed it to Captain Stone. "We need to tell the President," Stone said. "And the United Nations. This is bigger than just America." Jake looked at the screens showing deep space. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was waiting to die. They had reached across the stars to ask for help from people they had never met. "What if it's a trap?" asked Lieutenant Don Murphy, who had been quiet until now. "What if these Crexenary are using this to trick us into revealing ourselves?" Then we're already dead, Stone replied. If they can fake a message like this, they're advanced enough to find us anyway. Dr. Parker was still working on the translation, trying to understand every word perfectly. There's something else, she said. The Veltar mentioned that they've heard stories about human warriors. How is that possible? We've never been to space. Maybe other species have been watching us, Jake suggested. Maybe they've seen our wars, and our movies and our history. Maybe they know we're good at fighting. Stone stood up and gathered the papers. I need to make some phone calls. Jake, keep monitoring the signal. If any more messages come in, wake me up immediately. As Stone left the room, Jake looked at his team. They were all thinking the same thing. Humanity was about to make the biggest decision in its history. They could ignore the message and hope the aliens would leave them alone. Or they could go to war against an enemy they knew nothing about to save people they had never met. Sir, Lieutenant Murphy said quietly, what do you think we should do? Jake thought about the message. He thought about the Veltar children, who were probably hiding in fear while their world burned. He thought about the Krexenari who killed for pleasure and enslaved entire species. I think, Jake said slowly, that humanity has never walked away from a fight when innocent people needed help. And I don't think we're going to start now. Outside the control room, the sun was setting over Earth. Soon the president would have to make a choice. Soon humanity would have to decide if it was ready to go to war among the stars. The universe was about to find out what humans were really made of. President Amy Collins stood in the White House Situation Room, looking at the faces of world leaders on the video screens. The emergency session had been called 6 hours ago, and the debate was getting heated. Some countries wanted to help the Veltar. Others wanted to stay hidden and hope the war would pass them by. We're talking about fighting an enemy that has conquered hundreds of worlds, said the British Prime Minister. How do we know we can win? We don't, President Collins replied, but we know what happens if we do nothing. The Veltar die, and eventually the Krexenari find us anyway. The Russian president leaned forward on his screen. What if we're not ready? What if we make things worse? Captain Ryan Stone stepped forward with a folder full of papers. Madam President, I've been working with our scientists all night. The Veltar technology they sent us is incredible. If we can combine it with our weapons, we might actually have a chance. Collins looked around the room. I need a decision. Are we going to help them or not? The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity would go to war. 3 hours later, Collins signed the order that would change everything. Operation Starlight was officially approved. Colonel Matt Hughes was given command of the 7th Expeditionary Fleet. Humanity's first Space Navy. Hughes had been a fighter pilot for 15 years before moving to command positions. He was known for being calm under pressure and never leaving anyone behind. Now he had to build a fleet from nothing and get it ready for war in just 2 weeks. I need ships, weapons, and soldiers, he told General Kate Rodriguez. And I need them yesterday. Rodriguez was in charge of putting Veltar technology into human weapons. She had been working with a team of scientists and engineers around the clock. The alien technology was amazing, but it was also completely different from anything humans had ever built. The good news is their shield technology works, she said. We can protect our ships from energy weapons. The bad news is their weapons are designed for their biology, not ours. We'll have to build new ones. The USS Defiant was the first ship to be converted. It had been a regular Navy destroyer, but now it was humanity's first faster-than-light warship. Chief Engineer Sam Torres worked for 3 days straight to install the new engines and weapon systems. This is crazy, Torres said to his team. We're taking human missiles and alien shields and hoping they work together. If we're wrong, we all die. But the tests went better than expected. The Veltar shields were strong, and human weapons were more powerful than anything the aliens had ever seen. The combination might actually work. Dr. Tony Blake arrived at the main base to brief the soldiers about their enemy. He had studied the Veltar data about Krexenari biology and fighting methods, What he found was both encouraging and terrifying. "The Krexenari are big," he told a room full of Marines. "They're about 9 feet tall with natural armor on their skin. They're strong and tough, but they're also slow and predictable. They've been winning through numbers and brutality, not skill." Marine General Linda Hayes stood up. "So we can beat them in a fair fight, yes, but they don't fight fair. They use poison gas, torture prisoners, and kill civilians. They're not just warriors, they're monsters." Hayes nodded grimly. She had been training soldiers for 20 years, but never for anything like this. "Then we'll have to be better monsters." The next week was a blur of activity. Ships were being built and converted at every major port. Weapons factories worked 24 hours a day to produce new ammunition. Soldiers trained with equipment they had never seen before. Lieutenant Don Murphy was chosen to lead the first fighter squadron. He had been flying jets for 8 years, but space combat was completely different. There was no up or down, no air to breathe, and no ground to land on. "Forget everything you know about flying," his instructor told him. "In space, you can move in any direction. Your enemy can attack from above, below, or behind you. The only thing that matters is who shoots first." Murphy's squadron practiced for 12 hours a day. They learned to fly in 3 dimensions, to fight in zero gravity, and to work together as a team. It was the hardest training any of them had ever done. Meanwhile, Major Beth Warner was preparing the first ground assault unit. These Marines would be the first humans to fight aliens on another planet. They practiced with new weapons, new armor, and new tactics. "The Krexenari expect their enemies to be afraid," Warner told her troops. "They're used to fighting species that run away or surrender. They've never fought humans before. They've never fought soldiers who get angry instead of scared." The USS Retribution was the largest ship in the fleet. It was an experimental dreadnought with enough firepower to destroy a small city. Captain Joe Foster was chosen to command it because he had never lost a battle. "I've fought pirates, terrorists, and enemy navies," Foster told his crew, "but I've never fought aliens. We're going to have to learn fast and adapt quickly. The lives of an entire species depend on us." As the fleet prepared to launch, President Collins visited the soldiers. She walked through the ships, talking to the men and women who would soon be fighting in space. Many of them were scared, but none of them wanted to back down. "You're not just fighting for America," she told them. "You're fighting for Earth. You're fighting for the idea that strong people should protect weak people. You're fighting for the right of all species to live in peace." Dr. Lisa Parker had been working on communication systems so the human fleet could talk to the Veltar. She had learned enough of their language to handle basic conversations, but she was still learning. "What if we can't understand each other in battle?" she asked Captain Stone. "What if we make mistakes because we can't communicate?" "Then we'll figure it out," Stone replied. "Humans are good at adapting. We always have been." The launch was scheduled for dawn. 50,000 soldiers, pilots, and crew members would be leaving Earth to fight a war none of them fully understood. They would travel faster than light to a star system most of them couldn't even pronounce. As the sun rose over Luna Station, the fleet prepared for departure. The USS Defiant led the way, followed by destroyers, carriers, and support ships. The USS Retribution brought up the rear, its massive guns ready for war. Colonel Hughes stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at Earth one last time. He didn't know if he would ever see it again, but he knew that somewhere in the darkness between the stars, innocent people were waiting for help. "All ships, this is Fleet Command," he said into his radio. "Jump drives are charged. Weapons are ready. Today we find out what humanity is really made of." The fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying humanity's hopes and fears toward a war that would change the galaxy forever. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Veltar home system. What they saw made every soldier's heart sink. The beautiful blue planet that was supposed to be the last free Veltar world was surrounded by dark alien ships. Explosions lit up the planet's surface as the Krexenari Bombed cities full of innocent people. Admiral Steve Clark had been promoted just before the fleet left Earth. He stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, watching the enemy ships through the main screen. The Crexenary vessels were huge and black, covered in sharp spikes and weapon ports. They looked like they were built for destruction. "Count them," Clark ordered his crew. 200 enemy ships, sir," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim. "They're spread out around the planet in a blockade formation." Clark nodded grimly. The human fleet had 60 ships. They were outnumbered more than 3 to 1. But they had come here to fight, not to run away. "All ships? This is Admiral Clark. We're going in. Remember your training and watch out for each other." The Crexenary were so focused on bombing the planet that they didn't notice the human fleet until it was too late. The first they knew of humanity's arrival was when missiles started hitting their ships. Lieutenant Commander Dan Murphy led the first fighter attack. His squadron of 12 small ships dove toward the enemy formation like angry hornets. The Crexenary fighters were bigger and heavily armed, but they were also slow and clumsy. "This is Volf Leader," Murphy said into his radio. "Enemy fighters are big but stupid. They can't turn fast enough to keep up with us." Murphy's fighter spun around a Crexenary ship and fired his missiles into its engines. The alien ship exploded in a ball of fire. His squadron followed his lead, dancing around the slower enemy fighters and picking them off one by one. The Crexenary pilots had never seen anything like human fighters. They were used to enemies that flew in straight lines and used predictable tactics. Human pilots used their creativity and quick reflexes to fight in ways the aliens couldn't understand. "They're not following any pattern," one Crexenary pilot told his commander. "They attack from all directions at once. How do we fight? Something like this?" On the surface of the planet, the Veltar watched the battle through their telescopes. They had given up hope of rescue, but now strange new ships were fighting the Crexenary. Ships that moved like nothing they had ever seen. The space battle raged for 2 hours. Human ships were smaller and faster, but Crexenary ships had thicker armor and bigger guns. Both sides took heavy losses, but slowly the humans began to win. Captain Joe Foster brought the USS Retribution into the center of the fight. The massive dreadnought's guns could destroy a Crexenary ship with a single shot. But the enemy focused all their fire on the big ship, trying to bring it down. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported his crew. "Shield generators are failing." "Keep firing," Foster ordered. "We're not backing down." The Retribution's guns never stopped firing. Each shot destroyed another enemy ship, but the human dreadnought was taking terrible damage. Foster knew his ship might not survive, but he was determined to take as many enemies with him as possible. Meanwhile, Major Beth Warner was preparing for the first ground assault. Intelligence reports showed that the Crexenary had built a base on one of the planet's moons. If the humans could capture it, they might learn valuable information about their enemy. "Remember what we learned in training," Warner told her Marines as they prepared to land. "The Crexenary are big and strong, but they're not smart. They fight like animals, not soldiers." The landing craft touched down on the moon's surface under heavy enemy fire. Warner's Marines ran out of their ships and immediately came under attack from Crexenary warriors. The aliens were even bigger than the briefings had said, standing 9 feet tall with thick armor covering their bodies, but the humans were ready. They had trained for this moment, and they fought with the discipline and teamwork that had made human soldiers legendary on Earth. "Fire teams, advance by sections," Warner ordered. "Use their size against them." The Crexenary expected the smaller humans to be easy prey. They charged forward with their weapons raised, roaring battle cries in their harsh language. But the humans didn't run. Instead, they worked together, using covering fire and tactical movement to outmaneuver their larger opponents. Sergeant Mike Davis found himself face-to-face with a Crexenary warrior. The alien was twice his size and armed with a weapon that looked like a cross between a sword and a gun. But Davis had something the alien didn't have: 20 years of combat experience. Davis rolled to the side as the alien swung his weapon, then came up firing his rifle. The bullets punched through the Crexonary's armor, and the giant warrior fell to the ground. Davis didn't celebrate. He just moved on to the next target. The battle on the moon lasted 3 hours. The Crexonary fought bravely, but they were used to fighting enemies who were afraid of them. Human Marines didn't get scared. They got angry. And angry humans were the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. When the fighting was over, Major Warner stood in the captured Crexonary base, looking at the intelligence they had gathered. What she found made her blood run cold. "Admiral Clark, you need to see this," she said into her radio. The captured data showed that the Crexonary force at the Veltar world was just a small part of their empire. The main Crexonary fleet was 10 times larger and was already heading toward the system. They had decided that these new humans were a threat that needed to be eliminated. "How long before they arrive?" Clark asked. 2 weeks, maybe less," Warner replied. "And sir, there's something else. The Crexonary have been watching us since we arrived. They're sending data about our ships and weapons back to their empire. They're learning how to fight us." Clark felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had won their first battle, but it might also be their last. The enemy was coming with overwhelming force, and now they knew what to expect from human tactics. But as he looked at the burning wreckage of Crexonary ships floating in space, Clark felt something he hadn't expected. Pride. Humanity had traveled to the stars and fought aliens for the first time. And they had won. The Veltar sent a message of thanks to the human fleet. It was the first direct communication between the two species, and Dr. Lisa Parker translated it for the entire fleet. "To the brave humans who came to save us," the message said, "you have done what we could never do. You have made the Crexonary afraid. For the first time in 50 years, they have retreated from battle. You have given us hope." Admiral Clark broadcast his response to both the human fleet and the Veltar planet. "This is just the beginning. We didn't come here to win one battle. We came here to end a war. The Crexonary think they can scare us away by bringing more ships. They're about to learn that humans don't scare easily." As the human fleet regrouped and prepared for the next battle, word of their victory spread through the galaxy. Other species that had been conquered by the Crexonary heard the story and began to whisper among themselves. For the first time in decades, the galaxy had hope. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Species that had been enslaved by the Crexonary for decades suddenly had hope again. On prison worlds and labor camps throughout the Empire, prisoners whispered about the strange new warriors who had defeated their masters. Captain Joe Foster was recovering from his injuries when the first secret message arrived. His ship, the USS Retribution, had been badly damaged in the battle, but the crew was working around the clock to repair it. The message came from a species called the Zephyrians, who had been conquered 30 years ago. "We have heard of your victory," the message said. "We want to help. We know where the Crexonary keep their prisoners. We know where they store their weapons. We can be your eyes and ears throughout the Empire." Foster brought the message to Admiral Clark, who was planning defenses for the next Crexonary attack. Clark read it twice before speaking. "How do we know we can trust them?" he asked. "We don't," Foster replied. "But we need all the help we can get. The main Crexonary fleet will be here in 10 days. Clark made the decision to trust the alien resistance fighters. It was risky, but humanity had been taking risks since they first decided to help the Veltar. He sent a message back to the Zephyrians, accepting their offer of help. Within hours, more messages arrived from other species. The Keth Mori, who had been enslaved for 40 years, offered to sabotage Crexonary supply lines. The Yildani, who had been forced to work in weapons factories, promised to send technical data about enemy ships. Commander Alex Green was chosen to lead the first special mission. His target was a Crexonary prison world called Kethville, where thousands of prisoners from dozens of species were held in terrible conditions. The mission was dangerous, but the intelligence they could gather would be worth the risk. Green's team consisted of 50 of the best soldiers in the fleet. They traveled to Kethville in a captured Crexonary ship, hoping to fool the enemy sensors. The plan was simple: land on the planet, free as many prisoners as possible, and escape before the Krexenary could respond. The prison world was a nightmare. The surface was covered with massive concrete buildings surrounded by electric fences. Guard towers with automated weapons watched every entrance. The Krexenary guards were cruel and violent, treating their prisoners like animals. "Remember, we're not here to fight a war," Green told his team as they prepared to land. "We're here to save lives. Get in, get the prisoners, and get out." But when they reached the first prison compound, Green's team found something they hadn't expected. The prisoners were organized. They had been planning their own escape for months, waiting for the right opportunity. A Zephyrian prisoner named Valthus approached Green's team. He was thin and scarred, but his eyes burned with determination. "You are the humans we heard about," he said in broken English. "We have been waiting for you. We know where all the guards are. We know how to shut down the security systems. We can help you free everyone." Working together, the humans and alien prisoners moved through the compound like ghosts. They disabled security cameras, knocked out guards, and opened cell doors. Thousands of prisoners from dozens of species began to escape. The Krexenary guards finally realized what was happening, but it was too late. The freed prisoners outnumbered them 10-1, and they were angry after years of abuse. The guards who had been so cruel to helpless prisoners suddenly found themselves facing armed and organized resistance. "For every friend you killed," Valthus said to a captured Krexenary guard, "for every family you destroyed, this is justice." Green's team evacuated over 5,000 prisoners from the planet. Among them were engineers, scientists, and military officers from dozens of species. They brought with them detailed information about Krexenary technology, battle plans, and the locations of important military bases. Back at the Veltar system, Dr. Rachel Kim was working on new weapons based on the intelligence they had gathered. She had been studying captured Krexenary equipment for days, trying to understand how their technology worked. "Their ships are tough, but they have a weakness," she told Admiral Clark. "Their shield generators are powerful, but they're also unstable. If we can hit them with the right frequency, we can make them overload." Kim's team developed new ammunition that could penetrate Krexenary shields. They also created shield-piercing missiles that could destroy enemy ships with a single hit. The weapons were rushed into production and distributed to every human ship in the fleet. Meanwhile, the Krexenary High Command was becoming increasingly worried about the human threat. Warlord Thexgon, their supreme leader, had ruled the Empire for 20 years through fear and brutality. He had never faced an enemy that could match his forces in battle. "These humans are different," he told his generals. "They don't fight like the other species. They're clever, organized, and they don't surrender. We need to crush them before they become a real threat." Thexgon ordered his best fleets to converge on the Veltar system. He also commanded his forces to begin attacking human supply lines and communication networks. If the humans wanted to fight, he would give them a war they would never forget. The first attack came without warning. A human supply convoy was ambushed by Krexenary raiders near the outer edge of the system. 3 ships were destroyed before they could even send a distress signal. Lieutenant Paul Martinez was commanding one of the escort ships when the attack began. He watched in horror as enemy ships appeared from hyperspace and began firing on the defenseless cargo vessels. "All ships? This is Martinez. We're under attack." "Repeat, we're under attack." Martinez's ship was outnumbered 5-1, but he didn't retreat. He ordered his crew to ram the lead enemy ship, sacrificing himself to buy time for the other ships. To escape, his actions saved hundreds of lives, but they also showed that the Krexenary were getting smarter about fighting humans. Admiral Clark realized that the enemy was changing their tactics. They were no longer just trying to win battles through brute force. They were using strategy, targeting human weaknesses, and learning from their defeats. "They're adapting," he told his officers. "We need to adapt faster." The human fleet began using guerrilla tactics, striking at enemy bases and disappearing before the Krexenary could respond. They worked with resistance fighters throughout the Empire, sharing intelligence and coordinating attacks. Captain Ryan Stone, now promoted to admiral, led a series of raids on Crexenary supply bases. His ships would appear from hyperspace, destroy their targets, and vanish before enemy reinforcements could arrive. "Hit them hard, hit them fast, and get out," Stone told his pilots. "We can't match their numbers, but we can make them afraid to leave their bases." The strategy worked. Crexenary supply lines began to break down as human raiders destroyed convoy after convoy. Enemy bases were constantly under attack, and Crexenary commanders never knew where the humans would strike next. But the real victory came when the alien resistance movements began to coordinate their efforts. Species that had been enemies for centuries put aside their differences to fight their common oppressor. The Kethmori sabotaged weapon factories on their home world. The Yildani fed false information to Crexenary intelligence. The Zephyrians organized prison breaks on dozens of worlds. For the first time in decades, the Crexenary Empire was facing organized resistance on multiple fronts. "The humans have done more than just win battles," Vaelthus said during a secret meeting of resistance leaders. "They have shown us that the Crexenary can be defeated. They have given us something we lost long ago: hope." As the main Crexenary fleet approached the Veltar system, Admiral Clark prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. He had fewer ships than the enemy, but he had something more valuable: allies who were willing to fight for their freedom. The tide of the war was turning, but the hardest battle was still to come. The sensors on the USS Defiant began screaming warnings 2 days before anyone could see the enemy fleet. Admiral Steve Clark stood on the bridge, watching the readings with growing concern. The numbers were worse than anyone had imagined. 2,000 ships, sir, reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim, her voice barely steady. "They're coming out of hyperspace at the edge of the system." Clark felt his stomach drop. The human fleet had grown to 120 ships with the addition of converted Veltar vessels and captured enemy ships, but they were still outnumbered more than 15 to 1. "Signal all ships," Clark ordered. "Battle stations. This is what we came here for." The Crexenary fleet was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Warlord Thexgon had pulled ships from every corner of his empire, determined to crush the human threat once and for all. His flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds, was a massive vessel the size of a small city, armed with weapons that could destroy planets. "These humans have caused enough trouble," Thexgon told his generals as they approached the Veltar system. "Today we will show the galaxy what happens to those who defy us. When we are finished, there will be nothing left but debris and fear." But humanity wasn't planning to face this overwhelming force alone. Admiral Clark received a message that made him smile for the first time in days. "This is General Kate Rodriguez aboard the carrier USS Valiant. The Second Fleet has arrived." Through the viewports, Clark could see dozens of new ships dropping out of hyperspace. Earth had sent everything they could spare: destroyers, cruisers, carriers, and 3 more dreadnoughts. The human fleet was now 200 ships strong. "Still not enough," muttered Captain Joe Foster, whose repaired USS Retribution had rejoined. "The fleet, but it's better than fighting alone." The Veltar contributed their remaining ships to the battle, adding another 50 vessels to the Allied force. These ships were smaller and less powerful than human warships, but they were crewed by beings who were fighting for their home and their families. The battle plan was desperate but clever. The human and Veltar forces would use the asteroid belt and the gas giants' moons as cover, forcing the Crexenary to fight in small groups instead of using their overwhelming numbers all at once. "Remember," Admiral Clark told all ship commanders, "we don't have to destroy their entire fleet. We just have to break their will to fight, target their command ships and their leaders. Make them afraid." Lieutenant Commander Dan Murphy was now leading 3 fighter squadrons. His pilots had become legends after their victory in the first battle, but they were about to face odds that would test even their skills. "We're going to be outnumbered 20 to 1, Murphy told his pilots as they prepared for launch. "But remember what we learned? They're big and slow. We're small and fast. Use that advantage." The battle began when the Crexenary vanguard entered the asteroid field. Human ships hiding behind the largest rocks opened fire without warning, destroying dozens of enemy vessels in the first few minutes, but the Krexenary had learned from their earlier defeats. They spread out their formation and used their massive numbers to attack from multiple directions at once. Soon, the asteroid field was filled with explosions and debris from both sides. Commander Lavra Thompson was in charge of coordinating the battle plan from the command center on the USS Defiant. She watched the tactical displays as red and blue dots moved across the screen, each one representing a ship full of people fighting for their lives. Enemy breakthrough in Sector 7. She reported, moving reserves to intercept. The battle raged for hours. Human ships used hit-and-run tactics, striking at enemy formations and then retreating before the Krexenary could respond in force. But slowly, the sheer weight of numbers began to tell. Human ships were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. Sergeant Mike Davis was commanding a Marine unit aboard a boarding vessel when his ship was hit by enemy fire. Half his men were killed in the explosion, but Davis refused to retreat. "We're going to board that enemy cruiser," he told his surviving Marines. "If we're going to die, we're taking some of them with us." Davis's ship crashed into the side of a Krexenary vessel, and his Marines fought their way through the enemy corridors. They reached the ship's engine room and set off explosive charges, destroying the cruiser from the inside. The turning point came when Lieutenant Paul Martinez made the ultimate sacrifice. His destroyer was heavily damaged and surrounded by enemy ships. Instead of trying to escape, he ordered his crew to abandon ship and then flew directly at the Krexenary flagship. "This is for everyone who died," Martinez said into his radio as his ship accelerated toward the massive enemy vessel. "This is for every world you destroyed." The USS Phoenix slammed into the destroyer of worlds at full speed. The explosion was visible from across the solar system. When the fire and debris cleared, both ships were gone. Warlord Dexcon, the supreme leader of the Krexenary Empire, was dead. The death of their leader sent shockwaves through the enemy fleet. Krexenary culture was built around following strong leaders, and without Dexcon to give orders, the individual ship commanders began to panic. "Their formation is breaking up," reported Commander Thompson. "They're fighting each other for command." Admiral Clark saw his opportunity. "All ships, full attack. Hit them while they're confused." The human fleet charged out of the asteroid field like an avalanche. Ships that had been hiding and running suddenly became the hunters. They targeted the Krexenary command vessels, cutting off communications and creating even more chaos in the enemy ranks. Captain Foster brought the USS Retribution alongside a Krexenary battleship and fired every weapon he had. The enemy ship's shields collapsed under the assault, and its hull cracked open like an egg. "That's for every innocent person you killed," Foster said grimly. Murphy's fighters swept through the confused enemy formations like sharks among fish. Without central coordination, the Krexenary pilots couldn't work together effectively. They became easy targets for the experienced human squadrons. "They're running," Murphy reported over the radio. "Half their fleet is trying to retreat, but the other half of the Krexenary fleet was still fighting. These were the most loyal and fanatical warriors in the Empire, and they would rather die than surrender." The battle continued for another 6 hours as human ships hunted down the remaining enemy vessels. When it was finally over, the space around the Veltar world was filled with the wreckage of both fleets. The humans had lost 60 ships and thousands of brave men and women, but the Krexenary had lost over 1,500 vessels and their entire command structure. "It's over," Admiral Clark said quietly as he looked at the tactical display showing the few surviving enemy ships jumping to hyperspace. "We actually won." The victory celebration was brief. Everyone knew that while they had won the battle, the war was far from over. The Krexenary Empire was vast, with thousands of worlds and millions of ships. This fleet had been their strongest force, but it wasn't their only one. But something had changed in the galaxy that day. For the first time in centuries, the Krexenary had been decisively defeated. Word of their loss would spread to every corner of the Empire, and enslaved species everywhere would know that their oppressors could be beaten. Admiral Rodriguez stood among the wreckage of the command center, looking at the casualty reports. Too many good people had died, but their sacrifice had meaning. They died as heroes, she said to Admiral Clark. They died so that others could be free. As the human fleet regrouped and began counting their losses, messages started arriving from across the galaxy. Resistance movements on dozens of worlds were launching coordinated attacks on their Crexenary occupiers. The empire that had seemed unbreakable was beginning to crack. The tide of war had turned, but the real work was just beginning. The news of the great battle traveled across the galaxy faster than light itself. On 1,000 worlds where enslaved people had lived without hope for decades, the impossible had happened. The Crexenary Empire, which had seemed unbreakable for so long, was falling apart. Captain Ryan Stone, now Admiral Stone, stood on the bridge of his flagship as reports flooded in from every corner of the galaxy. Rebellion had broken out on dozens of worlds simultaneously. Species that had been enslaved for generations were fighting back with weapons hidden for years and courage they had forgotten they possessed. "Sir, we're getting signals from everywhere," reported his communications officer. "The Kethmori have taken back their homeworld. The Zephyrians have destroyed 3 Crexenary military bases. Even the Yildani are fighting back." Stone smiled as he read the reports. The victory at the Veltar system had done more than just destroy a fleet. It had destroyed the myth that the Crexenary could not be defeated. The first priority was organizing the liberation efforts. Stone divided the human fleet into task forces, each one assigned to help free specific worlds. It was dangerous work, but the humans had proven they could fight the Crexenary and win. Commander Alex Green led the liberation of the prison world Kethval, where he had rescued thousands of prisoners months earlier. This time, he returned with a full battle fleet and an army of freed aliens who wanted revenge on their former captors. "Remember," Green told his mixed force of humans and aliens as they prepared to land, "we're not here for revenge. We're here for justice. The Crexenary who surrender will be treated fairly. Those who fight will be stopped." The battle for Kethval lasted only 6 hours. The Crexenary garrison was outnumbered and demoralized. Many of them surrendered rather than fight to the death. For the first time in the war, Crexenary soldiers were laying down their weapons, but not all of the Empire was ready to give up. In the core systems, loyal Crexenary forces regrouped under new leaders who promised to restore their empire's former glory. Admiral Clark knew that the war was far from over. "They still have hundreds of ships and millions of soldiers," he told the other human commanders during a strategy meeting. "We've won the first round, but they're not going to give up easily." The solution came from an unexpected source. Vaelthus, the Zephyrian resistance leader who had helped with the prison break, contacted the human fleet with a proposal. "We want to form an alliance," he said through the translation system Dr. Lisa Parker had improved. "Not just for this war, but for the future. The galaxy needs protection from empires like the Crexenary. We need to work together to make sure this never happens again." The idea of a galactic alliance was ambitious, but it made sense. The species that had been freed from Crexenary rule needed to defend themselves, and humanity needed allies if they were going to police such a vast area of space. Admiral Clark called a meeting of representatives from all the freed worlds. The gathering took place on the Veltar homeworld, in a great hall that had been rebuilt after the Crexenary bombing. Delegates from 30 different species attended, speaking dozens of languages but united by their shared experience of oppression and liberation. "We propose the creation of the Galactic Liberation Alliance," Clark said to the assembled delegates, "a confederation of free worlds dedicated to protecting the innocent and preventing future conquests." The vote was unanimous. The alliance was formed with humanity as its military leader and the Veltar as its diplomatic coordinators. Each member species would contribute ships, soldiers, and resources according to their abilities. Dr. Parker was chosen to head the new Galactic Translation Service, which would help the various species communicate with each other. It was a massive job, but she was excited by the challenge. "For the first time in galactic history," she said, "different species are choosing to work together instead of fighting each other. We're building something that has never existed before. The war against the remaining Crexenary forces continued for another year. Admiral Stone led liberation fleets to dozens of worlds, each victory adding new members to the alliance. The humans developed new tactics for fighting alongside alien allies, learning to coordinate attacks between species with very different fighting styles. Major Beth Warner, now promoted to colonel, trained mixed units of human and alien soldiers. She discovered that each species had unique strengths that could be used in combat. The Kethmori are excellent at stealth operations, she reported to her superiors. The Zephyrians are natural pilots. The Yildani are brilliant engineers. When we work together, we're stronger than any of us alone. The final battle of the war came when the Alliance fleet reached the Crexenary homeworld. The planet was defended by the last loyal forces of the Empire, led by generals who refused to admit defeat. They're offering to surrender, reported the communications officer on Admiral Clark's flagship. Clark considered the offer carefully. The terms were simple. The Crexenary would give up their empire and withdraw to their homeworld, in exchange for being left alone to govern themselves. What do you think? Clark asked the other alliance leaders. I think, said Vaelthus, that everyone deserves a chance to change. But if they ever try to conquer others again, we will be ready. The surrender was accepted. The Crexenary Empire, which had ruled through fear for over a century, officially ceased to exist. The remaining Crexenary were allowed to keep their homeworld, but they were forbidden from leaving their system without Alliance permission. Commander Jake Morrison, who had been the first to receive the Veltar distress call, was chosen to head the new Galactic Defense Force. His job was to patrol the galaxy and respond to threats before they could grow into empire-wide problems. We learned something important from this war, Morrison said in his first address to the Alliance Council. Evil grows when good people do nothing. We will never again ignore a call for help. Construction began on Humanity Station, a massive space facility that would serve as the headquarters for galactic peacekeeping operations. The station was built using technology from all the Alliance species, making it a symbol of cooperation and unity. President Amy Collins attended the station's dedication ceremony, representing Earth in the new galactic community. As she looked out at the representatives from dozens of worlds, she felt proud of what humanity had accomplished. We came to the stars to help one species, she said in her speech. We ended up freeing an entire galaxy. The ceremony was interrupted by an urgent message from deep space. A new signal had been detected coming from another galaxy entirely. It was weak and distorted, but the translation was clear enough. Help us, please help us. Admiral Stone looked at the other Alliance leaders. They all knew what had to be done. Signal. The fleet, Stone ordered. Prepare for another rescue mission. As the Alliance ships powered up their engines and prepared to jump to hyperspace, Morrison smiled. Humanity had found its place in the universe. They were no longer just the people of Earth. They were the guardians of the galaxy, the ones who answered when others called for help. The war was over, but the mission would never end. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, someone needed rescue, and humanity would answer the call, just like they always had. Just like they always would.